Well, welcome to the,
So it might be worth having a conversation.
I was just thinking if we had 10 more people, we could have a presidential debate, right? Is that right? And Benson, Trump said, I just got a call from him, he's going to show up and talk about
That's good.
how ugly you are or whatever, I don't know. But he heard about the slides. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's
So have a seat.
I only meant it in the most vindictive way possible.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give priority to the slips of paper that were in the box upstairs. And this is America. You know, you can use full sheets. You don't have to be ripping these little ones off. We can do it. Saving paper. All right. And Dave's so tall that he's going to stand because we couldn't find a chair to fit him. All right. So most of these questions are directed to everybody on the panel, so we can see how it goes. The first one, though, I think we can get some different answers from different folks. So it has to do with several of the presentations. Without a quota system or some kind of goals or metrics in place, how do you ensure that demand is met in your production or in your industry or in your service industry? So Mike's laughing already. Why don't you go first, Mike?
What makes you think goals will help you meet demand? I mean,
there you go with the question again.
So, you know, if you have demands and you want to meet demands, you try to make sure your process is capable of meeting the demands. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't have plans. That doesn't mean you don't have targets. But how do you manage them? I mean, you manage the process or you manage the number?
I think the other thing Deming was talking about is picking arbitrary goals. We're gonna improve by 10% next year. Yeah. Well, why don't you improve by 9.3 or 11.6? Where'd you get 10%? Yeah. And I remember I asked him one time, where do these things come from? He said they can only come from one possible place. They have seances.
and the follow-up to a goal of 10%, he said, without a method, he said, why didn't you do it last year?
Last year.
You must have been goofing off.
So Paula, is a PS on here that person is also especially interested in your response to, without a quota system in place, how do you ensure demand is met?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I have my little story about the Arthur Anderson thing. So I don't know if anybody's listened to my podcast, but yeah, Dr. Deming made me do some work around goals and management by objectives. And I don't know if any of y'all have heard me say that, but he must have had the biggest laugh when I would leave there, because I would bring my little packets and all my people's goals and all these things written down. And then he would, very quietly instruct me to go through each one, and we'd look at the columns, and the columns all looked good. The columns all sounded good. I'm going to reduce inventory turns by X, and I'm going to increase my number of trials in the R&D. I'm going to come out with a number of new products. I'm going to, increase the case throughput if I'm the production guy. And then, oh yeah, the people systems people, well, what are they going to do? Oh, well, yeah, they're going to reduce turnover. Right. So when we got everything all together, instead of, a system view diagram going this way, my arrows were all going like this. And he was writing it on the paper, and he was showing me, okay, well, this is going to counteract this. And then this guy's bonus is going to go down. So what do you think he's going to do? Oh, he's going to sabotage that guy. And then this guy over here is going to really, really want to work on that. And so that guy's going to sabotage this, and this guy's going to sabotage that. And by the time you get everybody in the whole organization sabotaging and killing each other and knifing and setting booby traps and all this kind of stuff, no one wins, and the customer especially loses. So we stopped doing that, right about the time he did all the arrows on the paper and told me what a goofball I was.
And you're still doing okay even without quotas?
Still doing okay.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
And how many years has it been now?
Since 1997.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking for that longitudinal study that we heard about earlier.
Time.
Anybody else want to comment on that, or should I go to the next one?
Next one.
Okay, next one. I'm sort of looking at you, Eric, because I think this came, and maybe Jim, you too. With the redesigned flow chart of work or the Kanban, how do you account for the need to have a clear hierarchy, or is a hierarchy not good or necessary? Answer any part of that.
Or all of the above.
Well, I guess the question is, what's the hierarchy serving? You know, what is it you're trying to accomplish with a hierarchy? Is it direction? Is it some kind of feedback process? Is it goal setting? I mean, what are the kind of things that you're looking for from that hierarchy? And is there a distinction between hierarchy and process? You can have both work in an organization. There's always some version of a hierarchy, I suppose, if you have some kind of leadership. When Deming said a system must be managed, that doesn't mean everybody's managing the entire system. There's some leadership there. So that could presume that there is some version of a hierarchy. It depends on how you view it, I suppose.
What about the aspect of clarity? Jim, you talked about clarity in your presentation.
Well,
So relate that to sort of hierarchy, but not necessarily about power, I think.
well, so yeah, so there's the hierarchy I think that we're talking about here is actually the workflow itself, the steps that the company is allegedly taking to create value. And one of the things that we tell clients that we think might be in jeopardy of falling prey to Kanban worship is we will put above their board, "How is this wrong?" Like a big sign that says, "How is this wrong?" And then challenge them every day to come up and say, "How is the workflow that you've set up actually a lie?" And what they'll find is that it almost always is a lie. And so what we're wanting is to be constantly interrogating the system that we've built and saying, is this system really providing value in the way that we think it is? Because if it's not, it's probably destroying value in some way that we're not noticing.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on?
Well, I was just thinking, 1989, Dr. Myron Tribus came to visit our school the first time, so I just put him in a room with about 30 kids for an hour.
You didn't like him or what?
No. And I said, you know, they have questions for you. They want to ask you questions. And after about an hour, he came out. He's kind of white in the face. And I thought, oh, they tortured him or something. I said, what happened? He said, did you know the first question they asked me? I said, no, what? He said, the first question they want to know is, why do we even need management? I said, nobody's ever asked me that anywhere in the world. And he said, if we all understand the aim, we all know the process, and we're working collaboratively, that word, we're collaborating,
For you to say.
working together to achieve the aim, why do we need management?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't show up on the system flow diagram. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
There's some roles of management that might show up.
Yes, yes,
The zero state.
yes.
Okay, I have a few more, but does anyone have a compelling need to go to the microphone? Because if you do, now would be a good time. Yes, Kevin does. Uh-oh.
Dave Sly.
Oh, I was going to get out.
Oh, there you go.
I figured you're standing up, so.
Okay.
After hearing a lot of this about the grades and how they can have such a negative impact, I'm assuming you are either required to give grades in your classes, and what do you feel about that? And is there any opportunity to do any of those things like what David was talking about or some of those things in your classrooms, and how would you feel about doing that?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great question. Right at the moment, I'm teaching capstone, as I mentioned. Capstone is a little bit of a unique class because it's experiential, right? I mean, the entire class is seniors in engineering have to go out in the real world and actually do something real, right, as a design to achieve real value for real people. That's the best of all possible worlds, right? Because the motivation for students is to impress the company, right? I mean, I've never had a student group saying, you know, what's the least I can do? You know, they get excited when they're in front of the customer, and they really want to impress the customer. So much like I think I saw it with David Langford when I saw this a couple years ago, the iterative process of design, where I work with the students, as I mentioned, going through iterations to improve each of the stage of their project submittal, which has multiple phases that are graded independently. But they're still graded and assessed. As I mentioned, As a result, the students that do get poor grades, and I do still assign a grade, are the students who did not make the corrections that they knew needed to be made. They are students that largely self-selected to say, yeah, I know that that I shouldn't assume this, or I shouldn't assume that. I should go in the factory. I should collect the data. I should chart it. I should analyze it. But it sure is a lot easier for me just to say, I think it's bad. Okay? I can't reward that behavior, but I've certainly coached and communicated to those students. So yes, at the end of the day, a grade is assessed. But one thing that I do differently in that class is I try to use the leverage of the client to deliver good results, and I try to coach the students to give good results. I am perfectly happy giving everyone an A. And in that class, a lot of people do get A's. But there are some people that don't, and usually it's based on the fact that they just don't show up to play the game.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple more. They're on a similar theme. What advice do you have for individuals earlier in their careers? So that's fairly open. Connected to the second one, which is the advice related to those of us who are becoming Demingites and entering the workforce. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. So we're looking for career advice and life advice, I think, based on Deming's teachings, and then specifically about entering the workforce. So Dave, why don't you start us off, since it seems like a good transition to what you just talked about.
Well, I mean, I'm really, once again, I thanks the students to come, and I hopefully, well, I know a number of faces that I will see in class, and I'll have a chance to talk about this, but I think that certainly we've hopefully implanted some ideas in them at a young age that allows them, as they move through their managerial structures, to actually affect change. I think it was been said by a couple of people here is the first thing you can do is go back and say, what do I have control over? What can I change, right? And then secondarily, I think that this might also enable students to look for projects or opportunities at companies where getting the first job, because that's where a number of you are. In picking a job where you have the flexibility, the freedom, where you're in an organization where you can make a difference. So often students come to me and say, oh, this company offers me $61,000 and this company's offering me $59,500. What should I do? And I keep trying to tell them the money on the very first starting day of work isn't the single number one attribute in job selection. And so what you've learned here may be great opportunities to ask those companies about their management practices. Do they have organizational charts? How do they incent workers and good productivity? I'd much rather, if I was a new person starting out in a new job, work somewhere where I can make a difference and where I can work in an organization where everybody's pulling the weight to get a common objective versus the infighting that we've seen.
Yeah, I would say it's an important thing to be in communication with people in your life, build a network. Almost every change I've made in my life has been a result of somebody I know. They've made a request. Eric, are you willing to do this? Will you come try this out for us? I'm at Peaker Services because they asked me to come up and do a project with them. And then they said a couple months later, hey, we built a position for you. Would you come work for us? Every position before that was a result of somebody I had conversations with, I had worked with in some fashion, been in communication with, built a network. So I think it's very important to just expand who you participate with in life, work in your community organizations, be willing to volunteer for things, go to the meetings, to the groups. Those kind of things are very critical for, it's not really a who you know, but it's, what's your network? Who do you interact with? So when we ask the question, we look at a definition of a system. It's a network of interdependent components that work together to accomplish the aim. So that interdependency is who we are. We think we're individuals, but we're really the sum of the interactions that we have in our lives. So we're kind of like a quality of our originating circle. Our originating circle is the people that make up our lives. And so, developing that originating circle, being in touch with them, keeping it alive and moving forward, I think is very critical.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I'd just say be the model. So there's a huge amount of things you can do when you go into a workforce. We now have hundreds of examples of our former students that went into positions and they just started applying techniques. They started studying what they were doing. They started working collaboratively with people around them, and lo and behold, before long, they're more productive than anybody in the building.
And eventually their boss will die.
Yeah.
Go back to Dr. Deming, sometimes you just have to wait for people to die.
And sort of a different spin on it is, Dr. Deming, some people thought he was a curmudgeon, and but the one thing I don't think anybody who knew Dr. Deming disagreed on was his personal passion to learn every day. He would do these 4-day seminars, and he always had a pack of note cards on spiral binders, and they were perforated at the top. And somebody would come up. These people, every break there were rows of people getting them signed books, and they would share a little something with him. He'd ask him a little question or something, and periodically he'd just write something down. And at night, one of the things that he relished is he would sit in his hotel room and have a gin, and he'd read through his little note cards, and he was like a little kid. He'd say, "Look what I learned today." I mean, this was when I didn't meet him till he was 86. So, that's a model that I think all of us can follow at least for a little while, right? And I don't think that matters whether you're brand new or whether you're old like some of us. That's a different take on it. But I would encourage you to learn and to ask questions and to continue to grow and develop yourself.
I just want to say that I had lunch with some of the most amazing women. 2 of them are sitting right there. And I learned so much from them about what you're talking about how to select a place to work. You interned and you learned and you saw things that you gravitated to and things you gravitated away from. And you shared that you want to work in meaningful work. And so to do that, you had to go and intern and experiment. You had to have different bosses. You talked about the boss that said to you, "I'm not going to allow you to just go out there and do the 5-minute once over like all the other engineering people do. You got to go out there and work with the operators." And I said, what an amazing boss. Like, that's a person you want to work for, right? And then someone else talked about the time studies they had to do on people and how it made them feel uncomfortable. And they themselves adopted this their own little methodology for getting to know people behind the iPad as they're doing the time and motion studies. And they created their own, much to what you were saying, they created their own network within a structure that was very demeaning. And so I think just from you guys, what I heard from you guys at lunch today, you're going to be fine. You're going to just break down those barriers that we've kind of lived with, because we thought we had to. And I don't think you guys think you have to. I think you think you're just going to knock it down, and that's just great.
Before I ask Jim for his comment, I just want to make sure that Paula gets to meet some amazing men.
Are there any of those, really?
A minute to comment.
Except for these guys on the panel. That's right.
So before I was an engineer, I was an angry punk rocker in the middle of Nebraska. And I learned an incredible amount from being an angry punk rocker in the middle of Nebraska, not the least of which being supply chain theory and how to invent a market. So there's a couple things with that. The first is that there are lots of things that happen to you during your life that you don't know the value of until much later. The second is that life tends to be a set of options. So every decision that you make every day, you had other decisions that you could have made. So sometimes allowing yourself the luxury of slowing down a little bit and thinking about it is not such a bad idea. Conversely, any option that you've undertaken, you can undo and go do another one. So we tend to find ourselves, I run into this problem all the time, that people in their careers will get trapped. They'll feel like they've gone to work somewhere and they can't leave because of, and they can never put anything after the of. They stay in bad situations and they just dwell there. So understand that you always have options, and that, I've been, I think, many of the people on the panel probably share this with me, but I went to a coaching summit a couple of months ago, and I said, how many people in the audience, 'cause these were all coaches, how many people in the audience have had more than one career? And absolutely every person in the audience raised their hands. When I started studying urban planning at Michigan State, one of the first things they said to me was, you're going into urban planning, 10% of you will actually be employed in urban planning. So there's a lot of really cool possibilities out there. Just don't ever limit yourself.
Thank you.
Dr. Deming often said if you're in a badly managed company, pretty soon you're left with only the people who can't get another job.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hello. So it's apparent that you guys have been impacted by the leadership and as well as the mentorship of Dr. Deming. And clearly you're here, excuse me, continuing the knowledge transfer. I've personally been affected by mentors. What are some of your views on mentorship or knowledge transfer, how you may integrate that into your companies, education, et cetera, and any advice for selecting not only a mentor and or a mentee?
I guess I'll start because we're all staring at each other. And that's just not
It would be
compelling.
good if you had a moderator, but.
One of the things that Tony Ann and I try to do very much, because we're often hired and labeled as coaches or mentors, and we try and do a couple of things. One is always help people to solve their own problems. Don't solve problems for them, and don't seek out mentors that are anxious to solve your problem for you, because that's not a mentor, that's a employee. The second thing is that, a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but in order to have, I think, a good mentor-mentee relationship, there needs to be a certain degree of empathy between both people. So over-reverence or over-control can be very detrimental in a mentorship position.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I tend to look at mentoring or menteeing because I usually get as much out of it as I give. That's my goal, is to get as much out of the person as they are asking me for. So I look at it as like serving on a board of directors. You can't be a mentor to very many people at one time and do a very good job of it. It requires time, it requires energy and effort. So you have to decide among family and kids and working and other things, what do you really want? Is this something you really want, you both really want, and this is something you're going to put the effort in? And the first thing I usually do is I give the person requesting time a book list. The first book is Out of the Crisis, so that's number one. The second book is First Things First by Stephen Covey. It's been a very important book, for me. And usually, I would say 98% of the time, that's the last I hear of them. So if they're not willing to read that 795,000-page book, Out of the Crisis, and they're not willing to read First Things First and work on a personal mission statement, which are the first 3 assignments I give them, then I'm not going to spend time with them because I'm pretty sure they're not really sincere.
Some of the best advice I've received around selecting a mentor, all it was around selecting a coach, was find someone who has produced results with people. So somebody who's good at coaching around one area or being a mentor in one area doesn't mean they're good at coaching around all areas of life. So there's an opportunity for you to, actually pay attention to, have they actually produced results with the people they're coaching? When I've coached people, one of the things I insist on is people being willing to make commitments and keep them. And if they've stopped, saying, here's what I'm going to do, and then they've stopped doing that, then it's time to stop that relationship if they're not committed to working. Kind of what you said is it's very important for you to take on that relationship as a commitment and be your word and follow up on the things that your coach is asking you. It's a version of wax on, wax off. Sometimes you might be asked to do some things that you don't really understand why you're being asked to do that. Just like read these books, you may not understand why should I read that book. Well, there's a reason your coach is asking you to do that. So there's some things that if you undertake that relationship is be willing to say yes to it.
Well, I'm afraid
Thank you.
we're out of time, but I have a couple more questions, and so I'll just say a couple of them are for David Langford. He's not that scary, so get to him directly for those. And then there's a question in regard to a list of companies that practice Deming's principles of management for interested job seekers. And paired with that question, how can I get more involved in the Deming Institute? Are there any student chapters? So I'm going to suggest that you contact Kevin for that, and we'll get some answers. But now it's ready to have coffee, lean coffee, very lean coffee,
Very lean coffee.
low-fat coffee.
Thank you.
Thanks to our panel.